Toxic people rarely look toxic at first. If they did, no one would let them get close. That's the first psychological trap. They don't arrive announcing harm, they arrive offering familiarity, attention, validation, or authority. And that's exactly why they're effective. Toxicity is not about aggression alone, it's about distortion. Distortion of reality, of self-worth, of energy. Or think about the last person who left you feeling drained after every interaction. Not necessarily angry. Not necessarily sad. Just lighter in motivation, heavier in mind. Conversations with them lingered in your head longer than they should have. You replayed what you said. Questioned yourself. Felt the need to explain, justify, or prove something. That wasn't accidental. That was psychological influence at work. From a psychological standpoint, toxic people often operate through subtle control mechanisms, inconsistency, emotional unpredictability, passive criticism, and selective validation. One moment you're praised. The next, you're ignored. Your brain, wired for patterns, starts chasing approval. Dopamine spikes when validation returns, cortisol rises when it disappears. Over time, this creates a quiet dependency, not because the person is powerful, but because your nervous system has been trained to stay alert around them energetically. The effect is just as real, even if we don't always have language for it. Healthy interactions feel expansive. You leave with clarity, calm, or motivation. Toxic interactions feel contracting. Your body tightens. Your breathing changes. Your thoughts become defensive. Energy isn't mystical here, it's physiological and emotional alignment. Your system senses threat long before your logic does. That's why one of the most dangerous traits of toxic people is not cruelty, but confusion. They make you doubt your perceptions. They blur boundaries under the guise of honesty, humor, or concern. I'm just being real. You're too sensitive. I'm only trying to help. These phrases sound harmless. But repeated over time, they erode self-trust. And once self-trust is weakened, influence becomes easy. There's a common misconception that toxic people are always insecure or broken. Some are. Others are highly functional, charismatic, and socially rewarded. What unites them is not weakness, but misalignment. Their internal state is chaotic, unresolved, or power-oriented, and instead of confronting it, they externalize it. They regulate themselves by destabilizing others. This is why you can feel exhausted even if the conversation was calm. No argument is necessary. Energy is exchanged through attention. Toxic people demand disproportionate attention to their problems, their opinions, their emotions, while giving little regulation in return. Over time, you carry weight that was never yours. If you're recognizing people or patterns while listening to this, pause for a moment. Awareness is the first form of protection. And if this content resonates, take a second to support it, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It helps this kind of clarity reach others who are quietly questioning the same dynamics. In the next part, we'll go deeper into why toxic people attach to certain personalities, and why some people seem to attract them repeatedly, not because they're weak, but because of specific psychological and energetic traits. One of the most misunderstood aspects of toxic dynamics is this question: why do toxic people seem to gravitate towards certain individuals again and again? It's tempting to assume it's because those individuals are naive, weak, or lack boundaries. But in reality, it's often the opposite. Toxic people are drawn to people with strong internal resources, empathy, competence, self-awareness, emotional depth, because those qualities provide what they themselves lack. Psychologically, this is called resource-seeking behavior. Toxic individuals are not stable generators of emotional regulation. They struggle to self-soothe, self-validate, or self-direct. So they unconsciously attach to people who can do those things well. Calm people. Responsible people. People who listen deeply. People who give the benefit of the doubt. These traits feel nourishing to healthy relationships, but to toxic individuals, they become tools. That's why the nice ones often suffer the most. Not because they are foolish, but because they tolerate ambiguity longer. They look for nuance where there is a pattern. They assume growth where there is repetition. They extend patience when distance would be healthier. Toxic people sense this tolerance quickly. And once they do, the dynamic begins to form energetically. This shows up as imbalance. One person gives clarity, stability, reassurance. The other consumes it. At first, it feels subtle. You might tell yourself, they're just going through a hard time. Or they need support. But weeks turn into months, and the weight never shifts back. You notice that you're always the one calming, explaining, adapting. Your energy flows outward and doesn't return replenished. A powerful example is the chronic complainer who never takes responsibility. You listen. You advise. You encourage. They nod, agree, even thank you, and then repeat the same story next week. Psychologically, what's happening is reinforcement without transformation. Your attention becomes a pressure release valve for them. They feel better temporarily, but they never change. And you leave each interaction slightly more tired. Another example is the subtle critic, the person who disguises judgment as honesty. I'm just telling you this because I care. Over time, you start questioning your tone, your decisions, your confidence. You don't feel attacked, but you feel diminished. This is erosion, not explosion. And it's far more dangerous because it doesn't trigger alarm bells. The key insight here is this: toxic people are not attached to you, they are attached to how they feel around you. They don't want connection, they want regulation. They don't want intimacy, they want relief. And once your nervous system becomes their stabilizer, your own stability is slowly compromised. This is why boundaries feel so threatening to toxic individuals. Boundaries interrupt access. When you say no, disengage, or stop explaining, the dynamic destabilizes, not because you did something wrong, but because the system can no longer feed on you. That's when guilt tactics often appear. Confusion. Victim narratives. Sudden warmth or sudden hostility. These are not random reactions. They are attempts to restore the old energetic flow. If you've ever noticed that a toxic person becomes more intense when you start growing, pulling back, or becoming clearer, that's not coincidence. Your clarity removes their cover. Your calm removes their leverage. This is an important moment to pause and reflect. Are there relationships in your life where your presence stabilizes someone, but their presence destabilizes you? If so, awareness is already shifting the balance. And if this perspective is helping you see patterns more clearly, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It supports content that prioritizes psychological clarity over guilt and confusion. In the final part, we'll talk about how to disengage without guilt, how to protect your energy without becoming cold or defensive, and how to recognize when growth requires distance, not confrontation. Disengaging from toxic people is one of the most misunderstood acts of self-respect. Many people believe that protecting their energy requires confrontation, explanation, or dramatic closure. It doesn't. In fact, the healthiest form of disengagement is often quiet, consistent, and internal. Because toxicity feeds on reaction. And clarity does not need permission to exist. Here's the psychological shift that changes everything: you don't owe access to someone simply because you understand them. Empathy is not a contract. Awareness is not an obligation. One of the traps emotionally intelligent people fall into is believing that because they see the wounds behind someone's behavior, they must continue tolerating it. But understanding explains behavior, it does not justify enduring harm. Energetically, disengagement begins the moment you stop offering regulation. You stop over-explaining. You stop defending your boundaries. You stop adjusting your tone to keep someone comfortable at your expense. And at first, this feels wrong. Not because it is wrong, but because your nervous system has been conditioned to equate peace with appeasement. Toxic dynamics train you to associate calm with compliance. That's why guilt shows up when you pull back. Guilt is not always a signal of wrongdoing. Often, it's a withdrawal symptom. A sign that you're breaking a pattern where your energy was being used as a stabilizer for someone else. When you stop supplying that function, discomfort arises, in them, and in you. The difference is that your discomfort leads to growth. This leads to resistance. A crucial realization: you don't need to convince a toxic person that they're toxic. You don't need them to agree. You don't need closure conversations filled with logic and emotion. People who benefit from confusion rarely accept clarity when it threatens their access. Distance is not punishment. It is recalibration. Healthy detachment doesn't make you cold. It makes you precise. You still care, but you care without self-sacrifice. You still empathize, but you no longer absorb. You recognize that not everyone is meant to walk with you through every season of your life, and forcing permanence where growth is required leads to stagnation. And here's the quiet reward most people don't talk about. Once you remove toxic influences, your energy doesn't just return, it reorganizes. Decisions become cleaner. Rest becomes deeper. Your intuition sharpens. You stop doubting small choices. You feel less urgency to explain yourself. That's not coincidence. That's nervous system recovery. Toxic people often accuse you of changing when you begin to protect yourself. And they're right, you have. You've changed from accessible to intentional. From reactive to grounded. From available to aligned. That's not betrayal. That's evolution. If this video has helped you understand toxic dynamics more clearly, this is a good moment to support the channel. Subscribe and leave a like. It helps bring grounded, psychology-based content to people who are silently navigating these exact situations. The goal isn't to isolate yourself from the world. The goal is to surround yourself with interactions that expand rather than contract you. People who respect your boundaries without needing explanations. People whose presence feels mutual, not extractive. That's what healthy energy exchange feels like. And remember this, peace is not something you negotiate with people who disrupt it. Peace is something you choose, again and again, by listening to what your mind, body, and energy have been telling you all along. When clarity arrives, honor it. When distance feels necessary, trust it. And when you finally feel lighter, calmer, and more yourself, don't second guess that relief. That's not loss. That's alignment.